As the group looked to the closing door with big eyes, it was Shida who spoke up first once more. "I'm 4 hits in, so someone is going to have to tell me, did that really just happen?" she asked, while taking a look into the round. Most of her companions seemed to be pretty much speechless, just looking back at her with lost expressions. "I am not sure what specific event you are referring to." Curie, who had returned to their normal voice for a while now, answered tonelessly. "However, I think the answer is most likely yes." "All right," Shida answered, and combed her wild hair out of her face with both hands. "So, I am not seeing things just yet. That's good at least." Indeed. The colour and noises around the room were buzzing around her senses a lot more than usual, as she had really not held back with her consumption that night. Next to her, James didn't seem to be doing much better, as the facade he had put up towards the security was already cracking again. He looked in the round, each of his movements lasting almost a second longer than usual, as it seemed that he needed to deliberately stop himself from overswinging with each action. "Hate to say it, but I feel like he's got the right idea," he finally concluded with another look towards the door that his presumably corporate-assigned stalker had just stepped out of. "We probably should get out of here before anything else crazy happens again." Apparently, as much fun as it had been, everyone else had had enough excitement for one night, so James's suggestion wasn't met with any resistance. Quickly, the group made their way out of the door, where they were probably blinded by the bright lights of the station, and almost swept along in the busy traffic. Even though it had been a night out for them, the GCS never slept. They said their goodbyes, where James made sure to try and pull everyone into a tight embrace at least once, even though he had limited success given the general size differences. Shida herself was more than satisfied with a verbal send-off, something the others seemed to be quite grateful for. Then they dispersed, as one group made their way back to the cabins assigned to the crew, and James and Shida began their march back to the hive. On their way, a sudden re-emergence of some of their basic needs made them stop to buy a laughable amount of grilled meat on sticks that neither of them knew the origins of from a vendor in one of the less busy areas. Since neither of them had any patience left within their body, having either drowned or smothered it in substances, they eagerly dug into it while walking, earning them a plethora of disgusted expressions from passing herbivores. With hazy minds, full bellies, and heavy legs, they finally arrived back at the hive, basically dragging themselves back into their room. Clumsily, Shida kicked the sandals off her feet, and haphazardly threw herself right in the middle of the huge bed, while James sat on his edge, bending down, and trying to remove his tightly laced shoes. However, his hands didn't seem to quite obey his commands, and he struggled to undo the loops he had tied into the shoelaces. Shida observed him amusedly, as he apparently gave up for a moment, leaning back and supporting himself with his arms while sighing. Quietly, he mumbled something in a language he did not understand, before leaning back forward and trying once again. The way he completely exposed his back and nape like that woke old predatory instincts within her. Not enough to control her actions, but enough to at least entice her inebriated self to act. She turned over onto her stomach and pushed herself up on all fours. Holding her face close to the mattress, she started to tense the muscles of her arms and legs and stretch her tail up in the air. Shifting her body left to right, she began to take aim, rhythmically wiggling her shoulders and hips while gauging her footing, constantly keeping her eyes focused on her target, who seemed to be completely unaware of her at that moment. And, as it seemed that he had finally succeeded in his task, indicated by him releasing a satisfied grunt, she pounced. "Ugh! Why are you like this?" James yelled out, as a forceful impact hit him from behind, followed by a sharp pain biting into his neck. Shida quickly released his flesh from her jaws, although she did keep her arms wrapped around his shoulders and started to rub her head against his, as he reached out to inspect the damage she had done. His hands softly rubbed over the wetted area. Her teeth had not broken his skin, not that he had expected them to, but he could definitely feel the indentations they had left behind. "You're dead now," Shida answered playfully, wrapping her arms around him a bit tighter than before. While he finally kicked the shoes off his aching feet, a rough, scraping sensation along his neck also informed him that she had apparently started to lick him now. This was probably what he got for continuously paying for hit after hit for her. At first it was pretty nice, however his pain receptors quickly informed him that this wasn't working out in the long run. "Alright, stop," he laughingly said, turning his torso and reaching for Shida's head, trying to somehow push her off of him. She apparently got the message and let go of him, flopping backwards onto the mattress and supporting herself on her elbows, while looking up at him with big eyes. "What? Too exhausted?" she asked, her ears fluttering, jittery. It's not that, he answered, rubbing the sore spot her tongue had left behind. Listen, I appreciate the gesture, but your tongue is like sandpaper. Her face morphed into a mixture of an amused and confused expression. Are you serious? She asked in a bemused tone. You just bested a giant monster in hand-to-hand combat, but me licking you is what does you in? Is your skin that delicate? As a matter of fact, it is, James said in an unamused fashion, still rubbing at the aching spot. Sheeda looked at him doubtingly. Then her expression slowly shifted, first to a disapproving one, and then to a sly look. Are you sure you're not just a bit shy? She said, propping herself up onto her elbows a bit further to give him an almost condescending look, pouting her lips and slurring her words into an almost baby talk. Big scary cat girl making you nervous? James laughed breathlessly, and now also let himself fall backward, landing slightly to the left of her. Very sure, he answered, rolling onto his side and looking her square in the face. Want me to prove it? Bashida laughingly pushed a hand into his face, trying to divert it away from her. Your breath smells awful, she mocked him. That's the poison, James laughed, and tried to turn his head away from her hand, before reaching up and removing it from his face with a firm grasp. Alright, I'll go brush my teeth. As he laboriously fought his way across the mattress back to his feet, he could hear Sheeda behind him do the same. He turned to give her a confused look, however she just made a shooing gesture with her hand, hurrying him along. He had to make a pit stop at his suitcase on the way, as neither of them had unpacked any of their stuff yet. As he then finally closed the bathroom door behind him, he could just barely hear a heavy, metallic clink ring out behind him. Once he had freshened up as much as his current condition would allow him, and had also thrown a good amount of water into his face, trying to maybe somewhat sober up a bit, he stepped back out into the room. Sheeda had used the time to shed her clothes, laying on top of the bedsheets in just her undergarments and looking up at the ceiling. Hearing him emerge again, she looked over and invitingly patted the empty space next to her. However, now it was his turn to play prickly, so he pulled his t-shirt over his head and threw it at her. Your turn, missy, he said, as she tried to quickly free her face of the thrown cloth. There's still meat stuck in your teeth after all. Once she had her face free again, she looked at James grumpily, apparently unhappily that he wasn't exactly playing along. However, she complied nonetheless. While she was getting ready, he now also freed himself of his shorts and plopped down onto the bed. The mattress was very soft, and he had had a very long day, so the urge to just drift off right then and there was quite intriguing. However, he had a sneaking suspicion that, even should he fall asleep now, he would not be allowed to remain in the land of the dreams for very long. So he stayed patient, until a now washed and brushed Sheeda once again flopped down next to him. Alright, where were we? He asked, tightly looking into her yellow eyes, staring back at him. You wanted to prove something to me, Sheeda answered, rolling in closer to him. He could feel her radiating heat reach his body by now. James reached out, wrapping his arm around her, and pulling her in even closer. Heads up, he said, keeping his promise of warning her before he planted a kiss on her forehead. Sheeda folded her ears back and scrunched up her face while enduring the oh-so-horrible gesture of affection. Finally, when James pulled his head back again, she opened her eyes, looking at him curiously. Alright, question, she said, while reaching up to wipe the kiss's remnants off her face. I don't get it. Do you or do you not like that stuff now? Because I don't think I'm into it, but I guess we could try it out if you want to. Confused as to whatever could have prompted that, James asked, what stuff? Sheeda turned a bit sheepish at that, merely replying with, well, you know. To which James could only respond, I really don't. In a gesture that was so unfitting that James almost laughed out loud, Sheeda shuffled in close to him so she could whisper it in his ear, as if the both of them were teenagers who still felt like they had to be careful using naughty words. You know, mauling stuff, she whispered, clearly expecting that to clear things up for him, which it did not. Mauling? James replied confusedly, his impaired mind trying to make any sense of what she was saying. Listen, I know that I said I was willingly mauled, but that was only a matter of... He was once again interrupted by the palm of her hand being pressed right in his face. Could you not? He asked, muffled, while lifting his arm to remove her hand once again. Not that kind of mauling, Sheeda said annoyedly. The other kind. Alright, I feel like we could communicate this more effectively, James said, pushing himself into a sitting position. maybe, just maybe, it would be a good idea to actually get on the same page before either of them got needlessly frustrated with the situation. I have no idea what you're talking about. Mind explaining it? Sheeda now also sat up, looking at him unsurely. Well, mauling is a pretty loose translation. I guess it doesn't carry quite the same implications, she admitted thoughtfully. And it is a fetish thing? James guessed, based on her earlier behaviour. Sheeda nodded. If you want to call it that, she replied. This confused James even further. And how did you get the idea that that would be something I'd want to do? He asked, trying to think back to anything that he might have done that could suggest him having some most likely weird fetish. Sheeda seemed a bit bashful, looking away from his face. He felt bad questioning her like this, as it seemed that it had taken some serious willpower to even approach the topic like she did. Well, I just thought with the stuff that happened in that movie and you putting your mouth on me and stuff, I just thought it was obvious, she admitted, while looking down at the sheets. At this point, the urge to pull her into a hug was strong, but he wasn't sure if that was the wisest move in this situation. James thought back to that fateful day. While the movie scene had been quite graphic, he could not remember it being especially wild. The characters may have gone at it like horny teenagers, but it was also a mainstream movie, so the directors had kept it all fairly vanilla. I feel like we are both missing some context here, he finally concluded, while looking at Sheeda conciliatorily. She now finally looked back up at him, as he shifted his legs into a more comfortable seating position and leaned back. She followed suit and looked at him expectantly. So let's just rip that band-aid off. What is mauling? He asked, figuring that being direct with each other would probably be their best course going forward. Somehow Sheeda still seemed doubtful about him not knowing anything about it, but she answered anyway. Well, I've never tried it myself, so I'm no expert on it, but I think it is about the feeling of danger getting people excited. That's where the name comes from. It's supposed to give you the feeling of being mauled by your partner. You really come at each other and go for the throat. You know, like they did in that movie. Slowly, the pieces started falling into place. Now that he thought about it, it made sense that Miette probably were a lot more protective of their throats, even with their intimate partners. Oh, I think I get it, he stated. I think you misunderstood some things there. They weren't mauling, they were just making out. Making out? Sheeda asked, as it was apparently her turn now to not know what they were talking about. Alright, apparently this would be a bit more complicated than either of them had thought. As it was now his turn to explain, James said, Yeah, it's something humans do when they are in the mood, I guess. Or sometimes to get in the mood. It just gets us going, if you know what I mean. But danger has nothing to do with it. Why do you bite each other's throats then? Sheeda inquired confusedly. We don't bite, he said, before correcting himself and further explaining. Well, some people do, I guess, but mostly it's just kissing, we only use our lips. And why on your neck? Sheeda pried further. James could only shrug. Because it feels good, he replied, not quite sure what else to say. We're pretty sensitive there, so it feels more intense than other body parts. As if to confirm whether or not that was also true for her, Sheeda reached up and softly let her fingertips glide along her neck. And all humans do that, every time? She asked thoughtfully, apparently imagining it for herself, if only for a moment. With mauling, it is also a lot about trust. Do all humans just trust each other that much? What if one of you does bite? James laughed a bit awkwardly. If humans bite in bed, it's usually not hard, he clarified, rolling the back of his head sheepishly. And it's not all humans anyway, but it is a pretty normal thing to do. To be honest, once we get into bed with a partner, we are mostly past the point of trusting. And even if we aren't, what if they bite me is one of the lesser concerns that might come up. That's so, Sheeda murmured, bringing a finger to her lips while thinking. James, leaning closer to her and teasingly said, What? Afraid I'm going to bite you? Sheeda snorted. As if, she laughed, and jabbed against his arm with the back of her hand. Having sufficiently broken open the mood, James leaned back again and assumed. So, going by that logic, I guess your people don't really do kissing, huh? Not really, no, Sheeda answered, still laughing a bit. Is that important for you? James shrugged. Can't really say. Guess it would be kind of weird to not kiss you, but I don't think it's a deal breaker, he replied. Although maybe we should give it a real try before ruling it out prematurely. Sheeda made a candid gesture with her arms and said, Go ahead, I guess. Where do you want to try it? Well, the usual place would be on the lips, he answered honestly, ignoring the part of his brain telling him to make an inappropriate joke. The lips? Sheeta asked, looking a bit taken aback by the suggestion. But she quickly caught herself once more and added, well, it doesn't hurt to try, I guess. Even though he had managed to keep things under control quite well so far, seeing her lean forward and close her eyes, waiting for him to make his move, did make his heart race a bit. He could feel blood rushing into his face as he acknowledged himself to keep his breathing under control. Oh well, here goes nothing, he thought, closing his eyes and leaning forward, slowly pressing his lips onto hers. As his skin made contact with hers, he felt as one would expect when kissing someone who had no experience and also wasn't really trying to kiss you back. Just his lips hitting the soft, unmoving surface of hers. Still, his pounding heart informed him that it was quite excited about this next step that they'd taken, as he felt her warm breath waft across his face. Pulling back and opening his eyes again, he couldn't help but let out a single, breathless laugh, seeing how Sheeta had scrunched up her face once again. Not a fan? He guessed amusedly, while she slightly opened a single eye to look at him. She shook her head. Sorry, no, she said apologetically. On my skin I can live with it, I guess, but that just felt weird. That's fine, James answered, and reached out one hand to pat her on the shoulder. I guess we'll have to work out our personal limits first. So far we have no licking for you and no kissing on the lips for me, Sheeta chuckled, while brushing some of her hair out of her face. Anything more? James quickly held up one hand. I have nothing against licking in principle, he quickly clarified. Just try not to chafe open my skin. Both of them shared an awkward laugh. All right, noted, Sheeta said amusedly once they had calmed down again. Anything else? Nothing that comes to mind right now, James replied thoughtfully. But we'll probably have to figure things out as we go. How about you? With a deep exhale, Sheeta dropped herself forward, resting her head on his legs and stretching out her limbs. I got nothing either, she murmured, as she turned her body into a more comfortable position. Why does this have to be so complicated? I guess we did this to ourselves, James sighed while leaning forward. He slowly let his hands glide along her warm skin, softly smiling as the familiar noise of her purring started to fill the air. At least this is nice, Sheeta cooed, while pressing her body up against his hand. Yeah, James agreed, leaning down and supporting his head by putting his right elbow on his knee. They remained in pleasant silence for a few minutes, just enjoying the moment with each other. Finally, it was Sheeta who broke the silence once more. So, what was your last girlfriend like? She asked, looking up at him with big eyes. James snorted surprisingly, needing a moment to regain his composure. You know, bringing up the ex is a big no-no in human society, he informed her, chuckling. He actually didn't mind at all, but he still felt like it was good to explain things like that. I have to know what I have to compete with, Sheeta countered whiningly. Come on, humour me. I was only ever with one guy, back during my days on Dumnia. It wasn't anything serious between us, but it helped take the edge off during my training when that time of the year hit me. That time of the year? James asked, his brain instantly latching onto that phrase. Yeah, you know, heat, she answered, in a tone like he was stupid. Honestly, I don't envy you guys with that. We girls only get it once a year, but you feel like that all the time, right? That must really suck. Then again, your body doesn't tear itself apart afterwards, so I guess things even out. Wait, do Miat actually have mating seasons? James asked, making Sheeta look up at him curiously. How does that work? And is it right now, or am I seriously misinterpreting some things here? Sheeta snorted, waving off his concerns with one hand. If it was now, I wouldn't be lying here so calmly, she explained, reaching up and putting one of her hands on his bare chest as if to give an indication what she was alluding towards. The heat is mainly for reproductive reasons, with the uncomfortable side effect of making us unreasonably lustful. But it is not the only time we ever get horny. We can still do it for fun at all times of the year. It just can't yield any results afterwards. Interesting, James murmured, scratching his temple while processing that information. As if she only now realized what him asking about it all implied, she suddenly sat up and turned towards him. Wait, does that mean that humans don't have one at all? How does that work? Are all of you just horny all the time? She asked, in a mixture of what seemed to be surprise and maybe excitement. I wouldn't put it like that, James answered, a bit taken aback by her sudden reaction. But I guess you could say that our level of libido is pretty constant throughout the year, and we can produce offspring pretty much at all times as well. Wow, Sheeta merely replied, looking at him with a strange expression. Didn't you say that it was exactly the same with the males of her people? If that was the case, this should change absolutely nothing for her. A bit more meekly she added, And the whole body tearing itself apart part? James looked at her confusedly for a moment before his hazy mind could decipher what she was referring to. Oh, you mean menstruation, he said, and slightly snapped his own forehead for taking so long to get it. Yeah, our women get it once a month, and yeah, they don't like it either. Once a month? She'd said disbelievingly, briefly shuddering at the thought alone. Human women don't have it easy, huh? I guess they don't, although I can't really make that judgment, James replied with a shrug. No first-hand experience and all that. Yeah. She'd murmured for a moment before she suddenly perked up again, her ears agitatedly flicking in his direction. Hey, wait a minute, don't change the topic. You still haven't told me about your last partner. Busted. Oh well, it could have worked, no harm in trying. Yeah, he said, deciding that he had had enough of sitting for now. He crawled past Sheila and plopped his head down on the hugely oversized pillow before he continued. Well, my last relationship was with one of my fellow students back during my studies. We got along well enough, but we also quickly realized that neither of us really wanted anything more for the relationship, so we decided that breaking up would probably be the best option. Sheila followed him to the pillows, putting her head down close enough to his that he could feel her breath on his face again. Sounds like humans are pretty civil about stuff like that, she commented, while scooting even closer to him. James awkwardly scratched the stubble on his cheek. Not all of the time. We were just lucky we could handle the situation maturely, he admitted, as this had definitely been one of the smoothest breakups he had ever seen, much less experienced. She'd nodded along with that, apparently only half listening to what he was saying. And what was she like in bed? She asked, apparently deciding to skip the theatrics now. James sighed. She was fine, but it wasn't particularly exciting, he answered honestly, feeling that he should probably just humour Sheila for the moment. If you ever meet her, don't tell her I said that. Fine, I won't. But you'll have to tell me how I'm doing, alright? She replied, reaching one arm across his chest, wrapping it around his shoulders. Alright, James complied, earning him a rough lick across his cheek. I'm guessing this also means that, should I not do a good job, you won't let me hear the end of it? You bet, Sheila replied, and used the opportunity to swing herself on top of him, bringing her face down close to his while sitting in a mount position on his stomach.
Oh, yes! Tom, I think it's working now. What's up, humans? This is Jackalope with the Dragonettes. I've got to say, I'm a huge fan. We're skipping the sexing for this video, since there could be small children or your grandma watching. But that's fine, because if you're cool enough, you can get the full episode on Patreon at the £5 tier. I don't know what a pound is, but it automatically translates to your home currency, so that's useful. It's got other cool videos too, not public on the main channel. Wow! Humans are weird.
As James lay there, all tucked in and in bliss, he was suddenly awoken by a shrill sound. His eyes burst open as he and Sheila simultaneously shot upright in bed. He needed a second to realise just what in the hell was going on, as his mind still needed to catch up with being awake now. Next to him, he heard Sheila order the lights of the room to turn on, as he wondered what time it was. Life in space wasn't exactly good for your inner clock. The two Deathworlders looked at each other confusedly, as the shrill sound repeated itself once more. Slowly, the mist clouding his mind began to clear, as he realised what it most likely was. A doorbell? He thought, wondering if a hotel room would have something like that. Then again, considering its size and situation, he also couldn't see why not. Coming, he yelled out, clumsily fighting his way out of the enormous sheets and over the planes of mattress, while Sheila looked after him sleepily. As he drowsily stumbled over towards the door, she laughingly informed him, "You might want to put some clothes on." He stopped in his tracks and looked down on his new body. She may have been onto something there, he thought, nodding his head and wagging his finger through the air. He quickly looked around the mostly empty floor, searching for his discarded clothes. Walking over, he picked up his boxers and shorts with his feet and quickly stepped into them. Neat trick, monkey boy. Sheila, who had wrapped herself in their blankets by now, commented from behind him, causing him to unconsciously flipper the bird before he turned back towards the door, even though that would most likely mean nothing to her. The shrill sound erupted a third time as he neared it, causing him to think that the room may have been a more convenient level of soundproof than he had expected. That, or the person ringing, was annoyingly impatient. Putting his hand on the bioscanner at the top of the stairs, he opened the hatch-like door, looking up at whoever was bothering them. "Hello?" A loud, melodious voice almost instantly rang out once the door had made way, and James recoiled a bit as the large blank face of their visitor shot down towards his as they entered the room, walking down a few of the stairs steps. Large, light blue eyes stared him down, as the person leaned towards him once they had reached his level, apparently studying his face intently. His eyes ran up and down the strange, pearly white person a few times, until his mind caught up with his situation, and he unsteadily replied, "Hello, warrant officer, what brings you here?" He had just about enough awareness to realise who that most likely was talking to him right now. It helped a bit that he had heard Sheeda's surprised gasp as the door had opened from behind him. "Hello, Ambassador! Oh, and the petty officer is here too!" The bone tree-like person happily rang out, their voice filling the room with the sound of strings being plucked. "I'm sorry, it seems that I'm interrupting something, but duty is duty." Something about their chipper attitude didn't fit in at all with their imposing, bone-plated face and their intense, unmoving gaze. James also didn't miss the lascivious shift in their voice as they said those last parts. Since what they said also did not answer his question at all, he merely stared at them for a moment longer. As they stared back at him, what he assumed to be their pupils constricted slightly in their eyes, as if they were focusing in on something. Then they suddenly perked up. "Oh, right, why I'm here," they blurted out, righting themselves up again and suddenly standing way taller than before. "You must forgive me, I always get so excited around interesting specimens." Against his better judgment he replied, "I'll take that as a compliment, so once again, what brings you here?" He also righted himself up before them. Suddenly he felt really uncomfortable with standing around topless, even though it was unlikely that his physique looked anything but bizarre to them. Some of the many strange appendages of the person now rose up, as he looked down and rummaged through an enormous satchel they had slung around their lean body. Finally, they triumphantly pulled out a thin, white item, and excitedly lowered it toward him with one of their branch-like arms. He looked down at the snow-white envelope. "Well, this is a first," he commented, while accepting the letter from them. "I don't think I've ever received a real letter before." The warrant officer let out a series of string instrument-like sounds that James immediately equated to giggling in his mind. "I read a lot about humans and the topic of old traditions often came up," they happily announced while closing their bag back up. "I thought you might enjoy the little gesture." Not bothering to open the envelope while the courier was standing right before him, James merely let his hand holding the letter sink down and asked, "Well, what is it?" Their pupils narrowed once again, this time possibly in amusement, as they answered, "Why, your invitation, of course. The Leader Supreme is quite eager to welcome you, after all." Right, that was the thing. He had semi-successfully managed to block out his imminent meeting with the most influential person on the entire station. It was also slightly disconcerting that his assumption that she would be easily able to find them, no matter where they ended up checking in on the station, had been dead on. "All the information you need can be found within the invitation. I'll also take the liberty of sending it to you once more digitally on your assistant, just to be safe," the officer continued, and James simply nodded along. "Be sure to arrive punctually. You know how proboscis are?" He most definitely did not, but it also didn't matter. The Leader Supreme was most likely someone you wouldn't want to keep waiting, and he had already done so once. Something that she had not forgotten, he was sure. "I will, don't worry," he murmured, as he took another look at the sealed envelope. "Very well then," the tall person answered, and took up a position that made James assume they were saluting him. "I will leave the two of you back to it. Have fun and success to you." He could basically imagine them winking at him as they said that, if only they had the ability to. Then they turned on the spot and started to leave, filling the air with string music once again as they left. "Success to you," James quickly yelled after them anyway, with Sheeta doing the same from across the room. Then he closed the door. Brief but pointless, he thought to himself, as he slowly skulked back towards the bed, while looking down at the sealed letter. This could just as well have been a mere message. Sheeta, who had apparently taken the route of trying to pretend like she wasn't there as long as her superior was around, slowly started to crawl over the mattress towards him. He felt her warm skin on his back as she leaned over him to see what it was he had gotten there. He broke the seal with a swipe of his hand and opened up the letter. It read, "Honoured Ambassador Aldwin, you are hereby cordially invited to the Leader Supreme's table, as well as to a guided tour of the Grand Community Station, by Her Highness the High Matriarch herself. She will await you on the 5th hour of the 36th day of the 48th month, Galactic Uniform Time. That is the 6th day of the 4th week of the 48th month, before her personal office in the command area of the station. This invite is for you personally, and cannot be extended nor given away to any third party. Do arrive properly groomed and rested, and cancel any other appointments or arrangements that you may have near the given time frame, as your meeting will be sure to be a lengthy one. We hope this letter finds you well, and wish you only the best for your meeting with the Leader Supreme. Success to you. Warrant Officer C. Hyfety, on behalf of the Leader Supreme herself, High Matriarch Apogenianora Ordoxia Tora. James's face darkened as his eyes ran along the lines of neat text. Quite different from the invites the military usually hands out, she'd commented into his ear, as she leaned further over his shoulder to get a good look at the letter. This almost sounds more like blackmail. James laughed. In a way it probably is meant that way, he replied, folding the letter back up. He moved over to the dresser next to the bed and quickly grabbed his phone, activating it with one of his fingerprints. It was the 6th hour of the 35th day, so he only had a few hours left until his time came, and he would also have to plan for the time he would need to get to the command area. He should probably start to get cleaned up right away. Did he even have any clothes suitable for such an event? Would it be best if he wore one of his uniforms, maybe? Then again, would anybody even care what he wore? They had probably met the prim and proper ambassadors of humanity by now, but would they be able to tell the difference? As his mind was already trying to prepare itself for the arduous event ahead of him, something pulled him back to reality. Sheeda had started rubbing her head against his, loudly purring in the process. As he curiously looked over to her, he could hear another sound, a low growling sound. He snickered. "Breakfast?" he asked amusedly, pecking her in the cheek. "Please," she'd answered, and roughly licked over his cheek in retaliation. "Alright, you get yourself dressed. I'll see what this place has to offer in terms of food," James said, getting up and moving over towards the room's terminal. Well, Will and the others had not lied when they recommended the hive to them. Service was quick and simple, and in no time at all food was delivered to their room for them. The first thing they did was simultaneously express their disgust at the food that the other had ordered. James had opted for a light breakfast, consisting of fruits, salads and bread, while Sheeda had ordered something that looked like sausages to James. While that in and of itself wasn't anything unusual to him, it was fairly obvious by their colour and consistency that they were made from whole animals, bones, hair and innards included. He had fed very similar ones to some of his reptiles back home. "And you'll really be going alone?" Sheeda said, after she had greedily wolfed down some of her food. It was oddly fascinating watching her eat without chewing at all. He could see her entire throat move as very big bites of food slid down it. "I'm not looking forward to it, but I don't really have a choice," James answered, gesticulating by waving a bun through the air while he talked. "Great, so much for our time off," Sheeda sighed, and stretched her shoulders for a moment. James took a bite from the bun, taking his time with chewing it before he replied, "Well, we always knew that there would be some work waiting for us here." Then he swallowed and got up, walking over towards his suitcase. Sheeda curiously looked after him as he knelt down and started rummaging through it. "Speaking of which," he said, as he finally found what he was looking for and pulled out a small, black disc that was as wide as a ping-pong ball and about as thick as his pinky finger, "I guess this will be a good time to finally try and use this." Sheeda crossed her legs and looked over at him, holding the item up for her. "You think Reprig will be there as well?" she asked curiously, while taking a sip of water out of a cup. "I'd be surprised if he wasn't," James answered, and walked back over towards the table. "And even if he won't be, he probably won't stay in his cabin the whole time." Holding it between two fingers, he handed Curious' spine device over to her. She grabbed and inspected it, holding it in between two pointy fingertips. "But isn't it a bit suspicious if I start sneaking around his cabin all of a sudden, even if I have no business being anywhere near it at the moment?" she inquired further, slowly spinning the camera around in her hand. "You're right," James replied. He had sat down once more and picked his food back up again. "That is exactly why you will not be the one to place it." Sheeda tilted her head sideways while looking back up at him, as James leisurely continued his breakfast.